The rapper, record producer, and actor Eminem is known for his controversial lyrics that have won him many gramophones and other awards. But his lyrics have also caused him to feud with many people during his career. His potent lyrics have landed him in plenty of squabbles over the years, but despite that, he has always spoken his truth in his music. One person who remained a consistent subject of his lyrical targeting for many a song is his own mother, Debbie Nelson. Their relationship has been strained due to the many things that Eminem has accused her of in his music, most of which she denies even occurred. It has been said that there's three sides to a story: his side, her side, and the truth. This is Debbie Nelson's side of the story. According to her memoir, My Son Marshall, My Son Eminem, Debbie Nelson was born into a splitting household in 1955. Her parents, Bob and Betty Nelson, had been fighting one another since the day she could remember. And one day they finally separated when she was just 7 years old. Her father and mother tried to work things out at some point after their split, but due to her mother's infidelities, it would just never work out. Then one day, her father remarried and adopted his wife's two children, one of them also being a young girl named Debbie. After finding happiness in his new family, Bob abandoned his previous family altogether. And from then on, she lived with her mother, who worked as a bartender at a strip club to make ends meet, which is where Debbie's mother would meet many of her abusive partners. Meanwhile, Debbie was left to take care of the household, which included her younger siblings and her drunken, abusive stepfather. When she was 14, Debbie and her mother had gotten into a fight because Betty had demanded that Debbie wash the dishes twice over just to make sure they were clean. When Debbie refused, her mother bum-rushed her. Debbie fought her back and ended up sprinting out of their front door into a nearby apple tree to hide. She could hear her mother hollering for her stepfather to find her and beat her, which scared her into staying up in the tree even after the sun had set. As her stepfather was looking for her, a boy not too much older than her would appear to stop him. The boy's wide shoulders and 6'2" frame scared him off, and Debbie would climb out of the tree and into his arms to thank him for her rescue. This boy, 18-year-old Marshall Bruce Mathers, had known Debbie since she was 12, and they were friends for quite a while. But after he had come to her rescue that night, their relationship had changed. The following year, when Debbie had turned 15, she had decided that she was going to run away from her abusive household for good. She had told Bruce that all she had ever wanted was to get married and have a happy life, and there was no way she would be able to do that living the way she was now. To her surprise, Bruce had proposed to her then and there. For a while, Debbie believed that she had achieved her dream life. She's now engaged to this handsome boy who wanted to take care of her, and she had gotten away from her mother. However, Debbie would soon realize that a relationship with a 19-year-old was a lot more mature than she could handle. Debbie Nelson had been raised Catholic, and her mother had taught her that sex was a dirty action, although she did not tell her what the act of sex entailed. She was given a lot of misinformation on what could conceive a baby, and was definitely not prepared to be intimate with Bruce when she was. She gave away her virginity to him in fear of him leaving after believing that he had been having his needs fulfilled elsewhere. Shortly after, they were married and trying for their first baby. Unfortunately, it would be hard on Debbie to try and conceive. She was very small and thin, and no doubt stressed from taking care of other people, which now included her new husband, her whole life. Although it was never said, the memory she shared about her relationship with Bruce made it seem as if he almost resented her for not being able to give him a child immediately. But when she finally fell pregnant, Bruce had become distant and cold to her. One day, as she was 7 months along in her pregnancy, they had gotten into an argument because Bruce did not want to help her carry a few cans of paint. Bruce's anger quickly escalated, and that had resulted in him pushing her down the stairs and nearly killing their unborn child. And when their son finally was born in 1972, Bruce had become a physically abusive addict that would beat Debbie anytime he felt like it. Eventually, Debbie had realized that this was the exact thing she had grown up witnessing and did not want to raise her son around. So, when her son, who she named Marshall Bruce Mathers Jr., was just a baby, she left her husband to go back to her abusive mother, who had also left her previous abusive husband. After an uphill battle with Bruce, Debbie was finally able to get her divorce finalized and get Bruce on child support. However, he would only pay a few times before fleeing to California to avoid the payments altogether, leaving Debbie to support her and Marshall Jr. on her own. Times were rough for them both. Debbie had trouble finding a stable income, therefore she had trouble finding a stable home for herself and her son's behavioral issues did not help. According to Debbie, Marshall had always been lively. He was such a curious child that often he would find himself in trouble. She claims that he would cause many problems in both her personal and business relationships. She even went as far as to say that she lost her waitressing job because Marshall pulled an old woman's hair and she refused to spank him. Nevertheless, Debbie said that she would always defend him and would do anything to shield him from the harsh words of others because she believed that he acted out because he didn't have anyone his age to socialize with. One day, Debbie took Marshall with her to drop off some of his old toys to donate to the Catholic Children's Charity. While they were there, a social worker introduced Debbie and Marshall to 3 young sisters, ages 14, 12, and 7. What Debbie did not know is that she was actually related to these girls through her grandmother on her father's side. She had come to learn that these girls had been passed around through foster homes for years by then. So, Debbie offered to allow them to stay with her for the holidays, and eventually she would take in them and their younger brother full time. So now, Debbie has 5 kids: Barbara, Wendy, Marshall, Tammy, and Eric. During this time, she met a man named Fred. He was great with the kids and helped Debbie take care of them, and Fred wanted to marry Debbie to help take on some of the legal responsibilities as well. However, Debbie had been scorned by marriage, so she was afraid she would have to go through the same traumatizing divorce she had gone through the last time. Sadly, Debbie was right to have her reservations. One day, as Debbie was coming home from work, she noticed smoke pouring out of the windows of her home. She rushed in to save Marshall and his siblings, who were left there alone. Meanwhile, Fred had been nowhere to be found, not when the fire started and not when she suddenly had become homeless with her kids. After all of Debbie's belongings had been destroyed by the fire and the water used to put out the fire, her foster children had been sent back to foster care. Now it was, again, just her and Marshall. In 1981, Debbie had gotten Marshall enrolled in school. Marshall had never enjoyed going to school, but it seemed like he hated going to this school much more than any other. Eventually, Marshall would tell his mother that there was a boy at his school who had been picking on him. Marshall had been very small for his age, and that made him an easy target for bullying. However, Marshall would refuse to name the kids who had been beating him and calling his name even after being beaten up so severely that he had ended up in the hospital with brain damage. Debbie struggled a lot with Marshall's recovery. He was very young and he would easily become frustrated when he couldn't move the way he wanted. Suddenly, Marshall was improving all of the time. He went from not being able to pour cereal in a bowl to getting dressed all on his own, rapidly. His mom was elated, but afraid to send him back to school, and even when she tried, she allowed him to guilt her into taking him back out. Either way, she was already worried because if Marshall were to hit his head again, it could kill him this time. So she began homeschooling him. Once he fully recovered, Debbie began taking him to concerts. He loved music and can always be found writing poems and making beats by drumming his hands against various objects. Debbie was not surprised. She herself had loved music. She had always encouraged him to do anything he wanted, and she would even stand outside with him as he got dressed up and breakdanced for money as a child. So when he got his first girlfriend, a girl named Kim, and began to shut her out of his life, it took a huge toll on her. She was always around, taking care of both Kim and Marshall, but she was simply made to watch this toxic romance play out.